Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL Wire site, with my co-host Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. We are here at episode 451, coming off of the Cardinals' preseason victory on Friday night. And, you know, as kind of gross as that game kind of started, wow, that was a little bit fun by the end, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I honestly, the beginning was fun when the first team defense was out there and looked competent against the Broncos, mainly first team offense, and not all the starters were, out there, but a good chunk of them were. And when we saw what this defense could potentially look like, and then even the second unit did a really nice job till close to the end of the second quarter. And so it's fun to see that. Yeah, I mean, the offense left you wanting early in the game, and that's to be expected as you unveil a new offensive scheme without basically your three best offensive weapons on the field, and Kyler Murray, James Conner, and Hollywood Brown all not playing. But we did see some flashes at the same time, which is really nice, right?
Yeah, it was. And let's kind of talk about that. We're going to talk about who and what stood out against the Broncos. We'll delve into, I mean, it was just a preseason win, but how important that actually was we'll talk about that. And then there's a kind of a bunch of little things. Zach Ertz is off PUP. Where's Kyler Murray at? What we could take away from the playing time, a couple of roster moves. But let's get started with that. Who and what stood out versus the Broncos? Now, the Cardinals, they won the toss and they started on offense. And there was nothing special about their drive except, it was 9 plays, 28 yards, but they picked up 2 third downs. And so basically they got just past midfield and then punted the ball. Now, granted, the punt went to the end zone. But, even if you don't get a score, just the thing that we've seen from the Cardinals in the last couple of years, it was sort of feast or famine, right? So they were either getting into scoring position or they'd end up with a 3 and out. And I was honestly, one of my biggest observations is after the 4 years of the air raid offensive scheme. Now, that wasn't just true air raid, but the kind of the offensive principles, that what we saw, especially with the starting offense, were very traditional offensive concepts. And it was simple. Colt McCoy was efficient. They moved the ball a little bit. They didn't make big plays, but I think this is at least initially, and I got a glimpse. I think it gave us a little bit of a glimpse of the pre-Kyler offense until he gets back, that this will be an offense that survives. It's not going to be anything, but I think it will be adequate enough not to that the potential, like the ceiling that we're going to see from the offense is just not terrible, right? And at least will be functional, and to be able to move the ball a little bit. It might not score a lot of points, but if the defense is scrappy, maybe they're not going to be terrible.
Right. Keep things close and see what happens at the end of the game, right? And that's kind of what we saw in the preseason. And obviously you want to see more from the offense, but we have to also remember, no matter what or who, I guess is the easier way to say, who the coaching is, there's always ups and downs, or there's always slow starts, so you go back to 2019 and the first 4 games of the Kingsbury era offensively weren't great. It wasn't really, I know they scored that 27 in the first game to tie with Detroit, but after that it was 17, 20, 10, and then they get to playing Cincinnati and Atlanta and some teams that weren't quite as good. And, they put up 26, 34. They put up, 27 against the Giants. And you see that. And meanwhile, obviously the defense was just kind of bad that year. And that was understandable. And you kind of saw it coming and whatever. But then they took that leap, not a huge leap, but it just was different in year two. Now all of a sudden you're averaging 25 points per game early in the season, right? And defensively, and so it's not a surprise, or it shouldn't be a surprise, especially in the preseason, like we said, without three of the main cogs out there, that it's going to be slow. And if the defense can put up an effort like that, results are not going to be that good. Let's just be completely honest. Like, they're not going to look that good defensively, maybe against the Commander Skins or whatever they are now, but not against good teams, not against, these teams in games 2 and 3 and 4. But if they're able to, at least give the offense a chance, that's what you want to see. And so that's why it was, I thought it was a real positive even before the ending.
Yeah, there were so many things. And now the defense was better than advertised early. They made plays. And that's the thing. For me, I thought I've always believed that with the coaching scheme-wise, that and the type of players that they got, that as the season progressed, that this defense would be competitive. I don't want to bet too much on the defense, especially against a Broncos team that had a horrific offense a year ago.
Well, and they're in the same boat, even though they had Russell Wilson and most of their offensive firepower.
They were bad last year, and you and I were talking before the show. It was like, what was Peyton doing? What was Sean Payton doing in that game?
Well, and they're still learning a new system too. So, I mean, I don't agree with it, but I shouldn't even say I understood. I don't agree with it. But you saw it, and that's the thing, is like, you look at it from this perspective. A guy like Russell Wilson, right? He played, sorry, I'm looking for the number here. I just want to make sure I get it right. He played 20 snaps. The Cardinals starters on defense, 5. That is a baffling juxtaposition, and again goes back to what we talked about, right? Like, we don't want to overstate anything about this game. We don't want anybody to be like, oh, the guys said it was an unbelievable game, and but there was some impressive parts to it, and especially when you look at how things went on defense. Like you said, like when they were competent on defense going into the second quarter, before we saw really anything in terms of scoring from the Broncos, that was,
yeah, they overcome the turnovers. So they granted, field goal defense of it,
right?
But the point
Brett Maher was awful.
The point was that after they had the turnover, the defense limited them to only a field goal. Those are critical things in football. Like, if you give the ball away, you have to be able to make plays to get the ball back, or hold them to 3 points, and they ended up getting away without none. But then they did that a couple times, is that the defense made plays. We saw a couple of nice things. LJ Collier had the tip pass. Vic Dimakaji later in the game they defended that screen, that boot, so well, because that running back had lots of open field, and Dimakaji timed the the leap and batted down that pass perfectly and defended that perfectly in that sense. But yeah, it was they were surprisingly, again, just the preseason, but with the narrative being all off season of how bad the Cardinals are going to be, the fact that there was competency on both sides of the ball was hopeful.
And that's all you're looking for in year one, especially where you're being sold that this is the worst team in football by a lot of people. I mean, goodness, I cannot, I can't remember the name right now. But they just dropped their, prediction for the season, and they had the Cardinals at, I think, 2-15 or 3-14, picking first overall again. So that's the thing is, like, if they come out and they're competent and they're in games until Murray gets back, and then with Murray, if they're able to start producing a little better offensively, like, that's a really exciting thing. And again, when you're talking about preseason, you look for positives, and I thought there were obviously the overarching positives of the win, which is always nice, but more importantly, like you said, defensively they looked, dare we say, good, and offensively it wasn't the train wreck we were expecting.
Right. And let's talk individuals. On the offensive side of the ball, was there anyone that stood out to you as either a surprise? So now, for me, one of the players, and I mentioned this in the solo show that I did last week, one of the players I had my eye on was Yelda Froholt. And guess what? That might end up being a very underrated scouting move. We talked about, like, after the hiring of Monty Austin-Fort and kind of how with the Patriots, they were able to build offensive line for the most part with day 2, day 3 type prospects. Wasn't Froholt drafted by the Patriots in like the 4th round, I think? And while he had some rough patches last year, when they go out again, they don't sign another veteran, and he's had the job all off season, and then to see some of the plays that he absolutely mauled. One of the guys that follows me on Twitter referred to as a choke slam. Zach Allen, a big, strong human being, and very disruptive as we've seen in his career with the Cardinals. But choke slammed Zach Allen. We saw him on a screen pass get out to the second level and demolish a cornerback. That addition that we were both very hesitant about might actually be a winning move if that what we saw on Friday continues.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously you're not expecting him to be, one of the 4 best players on offense in a game, in every game. But if he's a guy that can play well and not be the weak link, that's, I don't want to say just as important, but it's one of the more important developments that we'll see of the offseason, because that's where one of the questions lies, is how is that interior going to look? Because it feels like right now we're pretty locked into DJ Humphries, Will Hernandez, and Paris Johnson. And, we had questions about Froholt, and then I think there's still questions on that left guard position.
I don't know, because ever since like the last week of OTAs, it's been Wilkinson there, period.
Yeah, but he did not play well. He was probably the worst starting offensive lineman in the game.
And what if we've seen from his career, he is a capable lineman, as long as it's not bad. Like fans are legitimately scared about Dennis Daly playing. But if Dennis Daly is your 6th offensive lineman and jumbo tight end, hey, I think we'll feel good.
But yeah, so Froholt, I thought, looked, excellent. From there, it was kind of pick your poison. Obviously you had the great throw from David Blau at the end of the game. I thought, Tyson Williams ran well. I thought Amari DiMercado ran pretty well. I thought we saw flashes from Michael Wilson in the game of what he can do as both a receiver and a run blocker, which is probably going to be big in this offense, right? Yeah. All of those things stood out offensively, but I just think that like the most important thing was Froholt played well, and honestly, Pat Elflein didn't play too poorly right behind him.
Yeah, that wasn't too bad. I felt that the running game had plays to be made, but because it was Corey Clement and company, especially early in the game, that the plays weren't being made, and I think that running game would look better, obviously, with Connor leading the way and then other guys coming off the bench rather than having Corey Clement be the lead guy. I liked on the offensive side of the ball, there was one particular play because everyone complained about the Rondale Moore usage with Cliff Kingsbury, and I get why. That's a staple of most offenses there, but to see him get used on kind of a intermediate slant route, and he got shoestrung. Otherwise, he goes to the house. If they can do that a couple of times a game,
yeah, get him a little more vertical.
Yes, and not just like running, deep routes, just running down the field, but to give him a little bit of space, like this offense will have just a little bit of movement, a little bit of cut, get him just a little bit of leverage, but down the field. That might unlock something, and the fact that the one play and he got shoestrung, and he was so upset when he got shoestrung because he saw the field that he had in front of him. But yeah, there was a lot to like. I thought that, and when I saw the playing time at the end, I was like, holy cow, the snap counts. Blake Whitehart, the undrafted tight end, I think he recovered well because earlier in the game he had a couple of drops. At least one drop, but for him to bounce back, he ended up leading the team in catches, almost at the top. He had 5 catches for 42 yards, played the most out of literally either team. They're giving him a long look, probably to be their tight end 4. But then just to see, David Blau has never played. I don't know about the preseason, but in his 9 NFL games that he has played in the league, everyone has been a loss. He's 0-7 as a starter, and then the 2 other games he's played in, he came up in mop-up time in massive blowouts. And so it was almost funny to listen to him after the game in the locker room, but there's a reason why. He's not used to being part of wins. It's never happened before.
Yeah, and so it's, it was important. And that's the thing is, like, we kind of talked about it a little bit and beat around the bush a little bit, but that win matters in the grand scheme of things, right? And that's something that we'll discuss after we talk about the defense, but like just getting that mentality is going to be something that we have to see this organization get to and through, right?
Yeah, absolutely. On the defensive side of the ball, I think we both mentioned LJ Collier. Watkins had the block, but were there any player in particular that caught your eye? I think we all saw some potential in Keitrell Clark. I don't know.
Yeah, I felt like that's too low hanging fruit, right?
Right, like that's the obvious one. He was active. Obviously, the one big play was the diving pass breakup that when he closed that space that he had. But defensively, it was interesting to see because you saw a little bit from Cameron Thomas get some pressure. You saw from.
Do we know what the injury that's
Nope.
holding him out
They
right
don't
now
tell
is?
us anything. It is
And
ridiculous.
they don't have to do an injury report,
Nope,
right? During
not
the
until the
preseason?
regular season, because that's
Yeah, because just so people know, the only two people that aren't practicing right now that have been playing and practicing are Cam Thomas and Jeff Driscoll.
And Driscoll didn't even dress for the game, and he's not
Yeah.
making the team anyway. It doesn't matter.
Right.
He's QB5 on the roster.
Right.
But
yeah.
I thought for what we need to see to get just a little bit of pop, Zaven Collins didn't look like we saw him progress and start to look like a pretty good off-ball linebacker. He didn't look bad. He didn't look bad at all on the edge in the limited amount of time he played.
No, and he looked like he was comfortable, and that's one of the conversations that we're continually going to have, and something that we're going to continually talk about is the comfort level of these players in their new job schemes, whatever. And so Zaven, you mentioned it off the top. Keyshawn Clark was probably like the standout guy, just because he played 29 snaps. He looked like a good cover corner, and you're just like, oh, they need one of those. Zaven got 7 snaps. I mean, LJ got 7 snaps. Like, we can't judge a whole lot, but what we saw was undoubtedly positive.
Yes, that's the main thing. It just was like in those 7 snaps with the starters on the field, you're like, oh, they don't look bad.
No, but I thought another guy that stood out and played well was Antonio Hamilton. He was in the game quite a bit. He played 35 snaps, which
I want to talk about that. I'm very confused about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think that's a red flag, or do you...
We'll get to that a little bit. I'm very good because guess what? Dude's listed as number 1 on the depth chart. That's one of those things you're like, I don't understand that. And then he's played.
Well.
Yeah, he played pretty well. He had that really bad pass interference late in the game, which set up the basic. Gannon didn't say it. Blau did. They let them score.
Yeah.
At the end of the game. That went unsaid until David Blau. David Blau said, if he got to we need to let him score so we can come back and try to do something. I was like, oh. Because that wasn't mentioned by anyone else. So that in the case that the Cardinals strategically said after that pass interference at the end, yeah, they're going to let them score.
And then, I thought Demikheji played pretty well. You mentioned, his play on the rollout. And then from there it was, guys flashed. We saw a little bit from Christian Matthew. We saw a little bit from Isaiah Simmons. We saw a little bit from the rookie, the late round D tackle. I thought had a couple nice plays. Dante Stills. Yeah. So you saw a little bit from everybody, right? And that's kind of the bigger thing is these guys getting comfortable in what they're being asked to do and showing some ability to make plays. It was good to see, man. I was pleasantly surprised at, more than anything, how fast and physical the defense looked. They looked like they just looked ready to go.
Yeah. And I think that might be one of the best. And I think that is a product of a new team. And basically with new coaching staff, new scheme, because what we'd seen the previous couple of years with the Cardinals under Cliff Kingsbury, they knew what they were. They knew they were what they were doing, and so they were just trying to somehow make it through the preseason, and the culture is different, and obviously but where we learned the 5 players that the Cardinals view as too important not to play, right? That would be James Conner, Hollywood, DJ, Kaiser, and Buddha. And then you have a handful of other guys who were hurt. Zach Ertz was hurt, obviously. He's coming off PUP. Kyler's out. But of the healthy guys, you can see, okay, these 5 guys are too important to play in the preseason. But everyone else played some. And I think I love, and we talked about in the last show, how they've handled training camp practices. It was a way to sort of avoid the notion of veteran days off, because they would go intense and they would lighten up the next day. They would do a slower pace so that everyone's body was taken care of, and yet you're still creating the culture of practice.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too. And again, we'll talk about it once we're kind of talking about how important the win was, but just how engaged everybody was late in the game, right? Like, it's a culture thing that they're trying to put in, and you're mentioning the culture of the coaching and guys buying in, but I think a lot of it comes down to, and you and I have had this conversation off the air a dozen times. A lot of it comes down to, this is the most I've seen coaches teaching in a long time. Like, taking time to teach, I don't want to say fundamentals, because that takes away from, but like the intricacies of positions and the details that go along with playing certain positions, and maybe no bigger example than what they're doing with Zaven, right? Like, you see that in practice, you see it on the videos, things like that. Like, they're taking their time with him, and they're again, we come back to that word, they're trying to find that comfort level in him. And it just seems like, instead of being like, hey, this is what you've done your whole life, and this is what we want you to do, like telling them, it's like, hey, let's show you exactly how we expect it to be played. And then we'll do it, and then we'll do it, and then we'll do it, and then we'll do it. And then we'll do it again. And then when you think you got it, we'll do it some more.
Yes.
And then it's like, okay, where are we at? And so, whether it's Isaiah playing safety, Zaven playing the edge, LJ Collier, like we said, like, just looking like a guy that could start in the NFL. That was a question mark. Let's be honest. Like, a guy that flamed out on a team that desperately needs, defensive help up front. And he comes here, and you're thinking to yourself, well, we'll
it's
see what
something.
he's got.
Yeah, right. It's a guy.
And then for him to just be competent is just such a, it was good to see, and it was positive. Obviously there were negatives, and there's negatives every game. But there was more. Again,
there wasn't a lot to complain about, honestly.
No, I thought there was just 2 guys on defense that, what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe that we had expectations for, that didn't look like we would probably have hoped. And again, it was the first game, but I think a lot of it came down to, like, also when they were on the field. It was interesting. And one of those guys actually played well in Antonio Hamilton, but the other guy was Rashard Lawrence.
Yeah. We'll get to the play rotation, because that is intriguing as heck to me, because we thought that was a case of the depth chart just being kind of whatever. With the defensive line, the depth chart followed exactly the playing rotation. Anyway, coming up next on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the love. It's move on and talk about the importance of the win. Like, why did it matter in the preseason even? That's coming up next on the Rise Up Red. We're back on the Rise Up Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals had not won a game at home since October 30th, and they looked pretty miserable.
2021, by the way, 2021.
Yikes. That's so bad. So bad. Yeah. And so it's been forever. They'd won a game at home. And to do it in a preseason game, it's a preseason game. But to do it in front of your home crowd in the first game with the new coaching staff, you know what? Jonathan Gannon was preaching compete. We want to win. We want to compete. And obviously, you're not throwing your starters out there late in the game, but you preach competition. And so you've got the quote-unquote scrubs, camp bodies out there playing. You're still having them play to win, trying that game matters, that the final score matters, that the performance that they have matters. And I did exactly that. And here's the thing. This is, I think, exactly the sort of thing that you build on, even if it's just the preseason. But when you have a coach that prides on trust the process, the results will take care of themselves. Compete. Winning behaviors, champion behaviors. And to have that pay off in preseason game 1, that I think just, even though it doesn't mean anything in the standings, I think it does create a bit of a cachet of trust. And just, so if there is adversity, they've seen the results once, at least. And as long as you see some results, or you see close games, or even a win that every once in a while that you don't expect, every time that happens, when the coaching staff is preaching this, it reinforces it, rather than because Steve Wilkes preached pretty much the same thing, but had no results, and so it rang hollow.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations too where you're not preaching things that are out of line. You're preaching like, hey, like you said, trust the process. Hey, buy into the details matter. And those things are important. And, it's one of the conversations we've had, and, fair or not, we've gotten more of a behind the scenes peek of the Cliff Kingsbury era than probably any coach we've ever seen, between Hard Knocks and now that Johnny Manziel documentary on Netflix. And Cliff was just one of those guys that expected guys to be on it themselves. And this is a conversation you and I have had before about how the game has changed so much. And, you have the tight end university and the pass rush collective and all the wide receivers that do workouts, and things like that. And all of these things are now almost self-reliant. Like if you want to get really good, you have to go out and find that time and that effort on your own. And that even kind of creeps into practice, right? Like, hey, we got to install. We don't have time to go over the details. We don't have time to go over the minutia of things. And Gannon and his staff thus far seem to have gone the opposite direction with that, right? They're like, hey, let's pull back on the, we gotta get things installed, and say, hey, we can go real basic, but we have to do it really well. And then we can add more onto your plate. Like once we're able to get more, we will, or you guys will be able to handle more, we'll give you more. And that's just a different mentality, right? It's just a different way of going about it. And like you said, the wins are become what's important because they have to buy into that, oh, they're doing this and they're doing it for me and it's working. Look, and like I said, I think one of the coolest, biggest things that we saw was just that everybody seemed engaged at the end. You had Paris Johnson, you had Kyler Murray running out on the field, right? Like everybody was engaged. So it mattered from 1 to 90, as opposed to, like you're saying, like a lot of times when the starters are done, they're checked out, they're done. And quite frankly, a lot of them are done before they get started, right? Like they're like, whatever. Like it's just a preseason game. I don't care. But like to see them engaged, to see them wanting to cheer on their team and be a part of it. And when DeMarcado got in, to see them lose their minds and be so happy, it was a really cool situation, and I thought it played out well, and it's a good beginning. That, like you said, I don't know if it matters or not, but I think for this moment, it's important.
I believe it is, absolutely. And the end result, the win doesn't matter. The way they won does matter because it shows execution of things that they've practiced. It shows offensive competency. It shows the ability to manage the clock. It was just good to see, and I will just say, the locker room, the last half season at least, was so heavy. The team felt it was light again. There was music playing, and granted, it's just a preseason, but you could hear cheers, you could hear music. Guys were upbeat. It was something we hadn't felt in the locker room at State Farm Stadium, in the locker room, in forever. So, and maybe that's something that can continue. Now, do I expect this team to be angry when they lose? Probably. That's what happens when you create a kind of a culture of competition. They're not going to react well to losing, but I think that the seeds are there, and like I've said, like, I love the approach Gannon takes because it takes everything that's good about Jim Harbaugh, but ignores the part where he's abrasive, annoying, and kind of an a-hole. Like people can't stand him. Players seem to be drawn to Gannon and his approach because I think they recognize the genuinity, just how genuine his approach for caring for players. He coaches them hard. He has expectations. Like, these are the expectations, but he also shows that it's about, he keeps saying it, coaches serve players. It is our job to take care of them and to do, we want to establish this culture, but that players know that he also cares. As much as that matters for football players, they like the setup. Kyler Murray is going to thrive in this because of the structure and expectations. They say, Kyler, we expect you to do this. He's like, I'm going to do it. As opposed to, it seemed like before, Kyler, save us. And I think he grew tired of that. Like, he rises to the occasion of high expectations in coaching, I think.
Right. And that's, one of the things that it's been fun to watch, because this is a team that desperately needed leadership. And, when they had Bruce Arians, they had Arians, and then, Palmer, I think Palmer was a leader in the sense of a veteran, right? Like, he wasn't the fiery take charge type. And, obviously Larry Fitzgerald was never that way, but
what Palmer was like, yeah, go with me, guys.
Yeah. He was the calming, like, I'll show you guys how we're going to get there type, but he was never like the, Tom Brady, rah, even the Patrick Mahomes type. Like, he was, I mean, I'm trying to even think of who he's close to right now, but yeah. And so when you had a coach that wasn't that way, and you had a quarterback that's not that way, and you had, an enigmatic wide receiver who's insanely talented, but kind of a loner, right? And then and it's why it made so much sense that when JJ Watt got here, it really galvanized everybody, because it was like everybody was following that lead. And it also makes sense why when Watt got hurt, things fell apart, right? Like, obviously there's more to it than just that, but like, nobody stepped in to fill that void or fill that role. And, on those Arians teams, you had a Calais Campbell, you had even like a Tyler Matthew.
Rashad Johnson, Gerard Powers, Patrick Peterson had already kind of taken that role. Like, that secondary in terms of leaders, that was such a good group.
Right. And I just don't think people understand, like, even people talk about like a Matthew versus Baker and how similar they can be as stylistically playing. But like Matthew is a hyped up leader type, whereas Buddha is very much a go about your business. Like Buddha's like, I'm going to set the tone and you guys need to follow me. And that's like, it's just, they just didn't have that voice, and they still don't necessarily from a player perspective, but they have it in the head coach right now. And in the way he's emboldening his coaching staff and his, and so that, again, like you said, that's just going to build this trust and hopefully galvanize the team as a whole. And then you start getting leadership in the, hey guys, this works. Let's all follow, and let's all be in together.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's talk about a variety of things. Zach Ertz, roster moods, play rotations. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's kind of talk about the playing rotations. Some observation. We saw that. You brought up Antonio Hamilton, and this is a very interesting thing to me because he's listed number 1 on the depth chart. It's important to note that his 2023 salary is 100% guaranteed. Jonathan Gannon was glowing about what he said about Hamilton, but he only played like 5 special team snaps, and he played a gob ton of time with the third stringers. I don't know what to think of that, honestly. Normally, if you are playing that much late and you're not a starter, that usually means
you're somehow a bubble guy.
Yes, and I will say the way they have the way the roster's looking, the cornerback room, because that you've got Marco Keitrell, you've got Christian Matthew. You assume he's a lock for the roster, but then you've got Antonio Hamilton, completely guaranteed salary. You've got Garrett Williams, who hasn't come off NFI, and we don't know if he will. You've got Chris Boyd, who is a special teams guy, plays a ton on special teams, and played a lot on special teams, and he is guaranteed, I think, $400,000 of his salary this year too. So how that roster builds out is super interesting. I don't know if Hamilton is in danger, but I can't. I'm not sure what to think about that.
Yeah, I'm with you because it was just such an odd usage, right? Something we didn't expect to see. And for him to end up playing so much when it wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't necessary, because obviously that's disrespectful to the coaches, but like it just was, I guess, surprising that he was one of the guys that was spending so much time on the field in the preseason. Like it was completely unexpected. I don't want to say shocking, but like, it just wasn't something.
It was one of those things just you're like, I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah. And it was just, it was just odd because, like you said, he was in the game at the end. And for a veteran, that typically means what? You're on the bubble, or like right. They want to see something out of you, but like, I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds, because I think as of right now, it's up in the air if it matters. But I think right now you're also looking at it and going, all right, like, make this make sense to me, please.
Another thing that I was super intrigued by playing wise was the defensive line rotation, because I wasn't sure whether I believed the depth chart on the defensive line, because it had LJ Collier, Lecky Fotu, and Jonathan Ledbetter, and Rashard Lawrence was listed as the number 3 nose tackle. Now the way they played their playing rotation matched it perfectly. But the one thing I noticed is this. I would guess probably almost all Cardinals fans that felt of the defensive linemen that returned this year. So you've got Ledbetter, you've got Richard Lawrence, that you've got Lecky Fotu, that if you had to pick one who probably wasn't going to make the team was Lecky Fotu. And right now it looks he's firmly established as their starting nose tackle. I find it interesting that I think this is a quiet move that this coaching staff has done, because they moved Isaiah Simmons, they moved Zaven Collins. And when Lecky, I will say this, I loved Lecky Fotu was one of my favorite draft picks because I saw potential, and I think the Cardinals did too. And he literally only plays nose tackles at Utah, but his athleticism suggests that he could do something more. And then he was used like never nose tackle, and his play was very underwhelming. If he's only a nose tackle and he becomes a starter, that's kind of fun. Although for me, it is a surprise, and if we had to look at those guys, Ledbetter, Fotu, and Lawrence, we figured that Richard Lawrence would probably be the one most likely to be the favorite to play a lot, or to be the lock on the roster. And right now, Fotu and Ledbetter are starters right now.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting how they scheme and develop this entire defensive line, right? Because right now we just have no idea what their plans are or how they're going to go about it. But as you said, as of right now, they have gone about it in the way that they said they would on their depth chart. And so it's just really going to be something to watch, because I don't know, man. It's weird to see it. It's weird to see them continue to make adjustments on it. So, it'll just be interesting, I guess, is the only way we can really put it, right? To see what they do and how they go about things.
Zach Ertz back from PUP. I'm going to say we won't see him, period, till week 1.
I was going to ask you that. Like, there's no way.
There's no, because one, they're slow rolling him in, so there's no way he plays this week, right? There's no way he would play no matter what in the Vikings game, because that's preseason game 3. And they don't have to make cuts. Remember that. Like, right.
They get all 90 guys still.
And so I think he'll probably get some work in their joint practices, but I think the plan is maybe the goal is week 1. They've basically got 4 weeks of practice before week 1 hits, and they're going to use that to build him up, strengthen him, and be ready for that. Then he won't need any preseason reps. But that said, that especially with one of the things that was notable in the offense, how involved the tight ends and the running backs are in the passing game. And having Zach Ertz back will be, even if he doesn't have to be explosive Philadelphia Eagles guy, but if he's a reliable target, because he's a reliable target, that means, 5, 6, 7 yards, like even if he's doing basic routes, you are moving the sticks with your tight ends, and that should open things up down the field. Maybe not necessarily while Colt McCoy's at quarterback. They're going to dink and dunk because his arm is doesn't have a whole bunch left. But at least there's the potential there with Kyler Murray when he gets back.
Right, and there's a little bit more that they can do, running the ball and things of that nature with the quarterback, obviously. And so it'll just be, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Again, we just don't really have any idea what this is going to look like. But like you said, the fact that they've got guys now coming back, and we'll see how this plays itself out, how they end up getting into these reps and things like that. That'll all be something to watch moving forward. because right now it's been, easy because, well, a lot of the main guys aren't out there.
Right.
And so do you think we're going to see Connor or those guys you talked about at all this preseason?
I doubt it. I think
Now,
those 5 in particular, maybe Hollywood a little bit. Maybe Hollywood a little bit.
And now we add Ertz to that mix, right?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Do you think more about them deciding that they don't want to take any chances, or do you think if Kyler was healthy that they would have played these guys?
That's a good point, because maybe they would have. I actually think that it might have something more to do with the guys behind them in the rotation. James Conner, is going to make the roster. They trust him,
and there's really nothing behind him.
It's who's the guy? And they didn't even have Keontae Ingram, so it was Corey Clement, Tyson Williams, Amari DeMarcado. Show something. Like DJ Humphries not playing was okay. Let's give Kelvin Beachum time at left tackle. Honestly, that was kind of telling. That when DJ was out, they didn't put Josh Jones at left tackle. It was Kelvin Beachum. I don't know if it was to showcase him, because I've always felt that the battle there's a very notable battle between him and Josh Jones. I don't know if you can have both on the roster behind DJ and Paris Johnson, but
right,
that was notable. And then you go, obviously, Buddha. This is a way to make sure that you get Isaiah more snaps at safety, and plus you need to figure out who your fourth safety is.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. What did you make of is that Sean Tucker, a different Sean Tucker signing?
Sean Chandler,
sorry.
Guess what? I think for sure he's a camp body. Dude's suspended. Okay. He's suspended for the first two games of the year. Why in the world would they sign him now? Because especially you've got. I'm not sure. It was very interesting because that fourth safety spot, if they keep 4 safeties, you've got 3 guys who legitimately could do that. You've got Chachri, was with the Eagles last year, played a lot of special teams. Juju Hughes was the first, so Juju ended up being the first safety in the game after Jalen left. And then you add the fact he played special teams, and then you've got Javonte Moffett as well. That fourth safety spot's super intriguing. The addition of Sean Chandler, to me, tells me somebody got hurt and that they're trying to get through the games, I think. Because I don't know why you would sign a guy right now who's going to be suspended for the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, I was just curious because, like you said, we know there's a battle for the fourth position, but is it going to be a guy that can contribute mostly on specials, or is it going to be a guy like Chaucer that's gotten reps in games, especially in the Gannon and Rallis defense, right?
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting because, yeah, it's just, I mean, this whole dynamic is playing out differently than what we've seen before, and a lot of that comes from the unknown, obviously, as you said early in this whole thing, but and figuring everything out, and it's fun to see it unfold. It actually makes it fun because it feels so different than, and it wasn't that long ago that Kingsbury and then Wilkes, like, it just feels so different from both of those camps to now this, and seeing where they are and how they're going about things.
Absolutely. No Kaiser White gave Chris Barnes and Josh Woods ample time to play.
And I was those are 2 of the guys I was slightly disappointed with. I just didn't see.
There was nothing notable about what they did, but
let's also say this: it's clear that White is the catalyst, or the guy that's going to make that linebacking corpse go. So in that instance, you kind of have to look at it and go, okay. I mean, it's not, you don't want to say okay in the sense of like it doesn't matter, but more okay in the sense of it's like, okay, we have to take that with a grain of salt because the guy they're expecting to be the playmaker wasn't around.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's just interesting to see how that playing time goes. They did add Shad Chandler, we talked about. I can't imagine he's more than a camp body. They released Stevie Scott. To me, because they had signed Stevie Scott last week, to me, his release tells me Keontae's back. Right?
Okay, yeah.
That's what it says to me because they didn't use him in the game. They only used Clement, Ty Williams, and DeMarcado. To me, that says, okay, Keontae's back, and so we're going to see Keontae probably starting. Well, and we'll kind of see because Keontae's ahead of Clement on the depth chart. Let's see if he gets more work with the ones on Saturday, just to kind of see where that's at because at least if Ingram shows a little something, and we don't know, we just don't have a gauge on that because they didn't go out and get a veteran running back, which means you think that they trust one of the guys on the roster to be behind Connor. And if there's anyone that you trust, wouldn't you probably think that's Ingram instead of Clement, who's been a mostly special teams guy?
Yeah, he's been mostly a third down back and special teams guy. So yeah, you'd want to see Ingram.
And then DeMarcado, he wasn't even the guy at TCU, but
he is 1,000% a practice squad guy.
Well, and he's a potential fourth back if they keep four running backs because what he does well is like intangibly type things. Like you saw him with the 2-point conversion, but talking to my buddy Eric Sorensen, who is a big TCU guy, DeMarcado does things like pass pickup, so pass pro and things like that, so things that you want to see. He can return kicks. He never did it really at TCU, but he's a guy to kind of watch. Like, I'm very intrigued. Like, are they going to keep three running backs on the roster, or are they going to keep four? You'd think they'd probably keep four, but you can also ride with three and practice squad elevate your way to to those moves later on.
Exactly, and I think that's just what the plan is with him. So we'll see how it kind of plays out. But I thought Tyson Williams did look good too, though.
Yeah, absolutely. He was. I had him on my 53-man roster projection. That's like after how he did, I bumped him into the final roster for that spot. But he's got a little bit, and we'll say. There is a little history of BYU guys coming in and being successful. We saw it from what was the Green Bay / Detroit guy, Jamal Williams.
Yeah.
BYU guy. You've got now Tyler Algier. Puka Nacua is making a little bit of noise in Los Angeles, the receiver, and Ty Williams. He's bounced around a little bit. He hasn't really done much, but as a role player type guy, it wouldn't surprise me at all. That said, anything they technically still have a roster spot available. Where do you think that's going to be, or are they simply managing bodies at this point? You think?
Yeah, I think they're just managing bodies right now. I think they have ideas of what they want to do, but I think at the same time, it's one of those situations where you kind of let the rosters play to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah, Jeff Driscoll, guess what? I think they are simply waiting for him to be healthy to cut because he didn't dress for the game. He didn't dress for practice, so I don't know if he's hurt, but the fact that – because why in the world do you need four quarterbacks on the roster aside from Kyler? Especially when they're given as much playing time to Clayton Tune as they are.
Right, exactly. Somebody asked me the other day if I thought David Blau had a chance to be the backup, and I said, I just don't see it.
I see a potential where he can make the roster.
Right.
That is if Kyler starts the season on PUP.
Right, which is...
Blau makes the roster as QB3 that way because that new emergency quarterback rule that they have, that cannot be practice squad elevation. He's got to be burning a roster spot. So Blau is a guy you could have on as player 53 to be on the roster basically as your emergency QB, unless, and I don't think they would do that, maybe he'd be the active backup one game or game or two, and you let Clayton be the emergency QB3 because, young, raw, that sort of thing. You might trust Blau a little bit more in a game scenario if he had to come in for Colt McCoy. But yeah, I basically think that Jeff Driscoll is just a guy right now. David Blau, I don't think they seem firmly committed to Clayton Tune, and so David Blau at this point is auditioning for other teams' practice squad, or in the case if Kyler is not taken off PUP before the regular season, that he can be on the roster for a handful of weeks, for about 4 weeks.
Right, and that's the plan that you would have to assume right now. But overall, I was pleasantly surprised and then happy. I think that's the best way to put it. Like I think everybody was like, "Oh, this was good," but and then it ended up in a win. You're like, "Oh, that was nice. Like that was nice to see." And
it was absolutely, especially because you know what, preseason games can be terrible to watch. Especially if you get behind, if there's like more than a 1-score difference, the fourth quarter, they are unwatchable football. This was exciting because you had a rally, you had the touchdown by the Broncos, then you had the game winning drive by the Cardinals. It made the end of a preseason game watchable. And let's be honest, some people like to watch the preseason. Very few people watch the fourth quarter of the preseason games, right?
Right.
We're the crazy people that do that.
The crazy people that have to, yeah.
Absolutely, yes.
And so for us, I think that's why we can say it was such a positive, because you just look at it and you're like, oh, this was fun.
Yep. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Rise Up Senior Podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk of the Web. I will do a solo show, so I'll just push off talking about the next game a couple of days. You'll get that probably Thursday night, Friday morning, and then we'll be back next week to talk about the game. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is episode 451. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Run!